schedule. You have joined the NEMSIS v3 implementation call for October 23rd. I'm Julianne Ehlers with the NEMSIS Technical Assistance Center. We've got a really great lineup today for discussion. Just as a reminder, this phone call is being recorded, and we will put this up on our website. So if you ever miss one of the V3 implementation calls, you are welcome to go back to the website or our YouTube channel and pick up whatever you missed or re-listen to a section. Sometimes they get pretty technical, and if you're new to V3 implementation, sometimes it can be really helpful to be able to go back in and listen to those sections. Also, please feel free to ask questions as we go along. You can unmute your microphone and ask, or you can type it in the group chat, and we'll be watching that as we go through the call today and ask whoever is presenting your questions for you. We're happy to have your participation, and the purpose of this call is to help assist and clarify with V3 implementation. So anything that you have on your mind, we're happy to address for you. The very first thing that we want to get started on is just as a reminder for the November public training coming up. Hopefully you can see the NEMSIS public training calendar for the fall on your screen now. We've done September and October, have had great response, great participation, lots of questions asked. We've gotten good feedback, so we feel like these have been really valuable so far. November 5th at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, Kevin White is going to go through the basics of using the Tableau dashboards that NEMSIS offers to you for state and for public use. They're really effective and powerful visualizations of the data that the field clinicians are working so hard to collect, and the agencies and vendors, and you guys are working so hard to submit to NEMSIS. So if you haven't had a chance to go in and look at these dashboards that are available to you, they're really impressive. There's a lot of information available, and it makes it easy, especially if you need to do some reporting or presentations to some of your stakeholders. Using these dashboards can be helpful to you. Kevin White's our resident expert on that, so you'll have an opportunity November 5th to listen to Kevin and ask your questions on those dashboards. You can use this QR code to add to your calendar. All four of these are connected to this same Zoom ID, and then we'll have the next four for spring of 2020 available probably next month, so that you can start planning out for those, especially if you have new staff coming on that need to learn some of the topics that we're addressing. Next up on our agenda, Laurel is going to go over new agency submission tracking. Let's see, let me stop share, Laurel. If you're ready to take that on, then let's give you the control for your dashboard to show us all about that.
Okay, everyone, hopefully you can all hear me all right. So this dashboard should look familiar to some of you because we already have a version of it that exists for our state data managers. And maybe if you've been around for a while, you might remember something similar to this for version 2. But essentially, this is a really simple dashboard. It just shows the number of PCRs submitted to the NEMSIS TAC over time by unit notified by dispatch date. So what we would expect is that for the most part, submissions should be pretty stable by week of unit notified by dispatch date. And this is the national data right now. I haven't narrowed to a state in order to sort of protect everyone's anonymity here. And you can see that to an extent, we either see increasing submissions or they do seem fairly stable around a certain amount. So we're opening this dashboard up to vendors, and the new version for vendors should be online this afternoon. And there should be also a performance update to the states one. There are no new features, but it should be a little faster, a little more responsive. This dashboard shows all of the NEMSIS records that have been received since the 1st of 2017 up to the present day. This version's in test, so it goes through June 23rd. And while I'm here, I'd like to point out we have some filters so that if you're a state, you can narrow in on software version and see if you're maybe missing all the records from a certain software package or from a certain version. We have by agency, so you can narrow down on agencies and see if there's a problem. And for vendors, we also have a submitting state filter. So if you have a problem with records in one state, you can identify exactly where that is and work to get those records submitted to the TAC. So I'm not going to show this table, but this table breaks it out by EMS agency. And you can limit the table to show agencies that have only a certain number of PCRs. So right now I have it set to 1,000 PCRs. So this only shows EMS agencies that have submitted at least 1,000 PCRs to the NEMSIS TAC since the 1st of 2017. So you can set that number to whatever you want. It defaults to 50, but you can set it however you want to sort of limit that list and identify problems in agency submissions. It's just a data table. The entries in the table are colored based on how the records have either declined or remained consistent. You might notice we're pretty generous in what we would consider a decline. Our color scale here doesn't go orange until a 30% drop. So another feature of this graph that I just want to point out is you do see a drop off as it moves towards the latest point. When this is on the website later today, this will be the current week, December 23rd. You'll notice there's a drop off. So the reason we see a drop off is because it takes time for records to be submitted, and this does track by week of unit notified by dispatch date. So this drop might be significant if you know that your state is submitting data same day or same week. But it might not be significant if you know that your state submits a little less frequently than that or is behind on submissions. But you will probably always see a little bit of a drop here, as it takes time for records to flow in and be processed, both at the state and at the national level. So this dashboard is going to be available to vendors later today, and I'll show you real quick where that's going to show up on the site. If you have not seen our amazing vendor report section. So if you head out to nemsis.org and move the Zoom toolbar, go to View Reports, Software Vendor Reports. And right at the top of this page is where you will see it. Right now, our latest software vendor report is this these state dashboards that are based off of resources sent, data from the state dataset, that kind of stuff. But you will see this agency submissions tracking right at the top here later today. And if you haven't checked out our other vendor dashboards, we have one that shows this one's current composition. It's just record counts. These are record counts for your software, and you can segment them by version, by date, by the agency that submitted them, by state. We have a data submission dashboard that gives more information on whether records being submitted, whether they're failing. Unlike the dashboard I just showed you, this one goes into a lot of detail. And the last one is data quality, and this checks some maybe more clinical metrics of things like, do your times make sense? Did you record a patient's age correctly? Did you include the number and the age units, like days versus years? And that kind of, those sort of metrics. So we have lots of great reports for vendors, and that new one will be right at the top later today. Does anyone have any questions about the new dashboard?
Yeah, Laurel, this is Clay. I'll just add a couple quick comments and just note for those that are participating on the call, you'll see if you pull up the participants, you might be muted. So if you have a comment, we'd love to have you unmute yourself and provide that comment. But did want to also say that this is another example of where we have tried to completely mimic a dashboard for vendors that is also available to the state data manager. So the whole purpose in doing this in that fashion is to kind of help the state data managers with their job and to reduce the burden of trying to identify whether there's certain anomalies or errors in data collection, and providing that exact same dashboard so if something is noticed that it's possible to get on the phone or to email your vendor and say, hey, open your dashboard that looks just like my dashboard I'm looking at, and I see that agency ABC has had a greater than 40% drop in data submissions to the National Registry. And as an example, the same thing is true for the submission dashboard and for other dashboards. It really provides a way for you both to be looking at the same data in a protected way that ensures that the vendor is only looking at data for which the vendor collected, and the states are only, of course, can see the data across all vendors, but it makes it so that there's a way for hopefully easier communication as you're working through any issues, any technical issues that you're discovering with data submission, data quality, or performance metrics. So any other questions? Okay.
All right, so if anyone thinks of any questions or comments or has any requests for any of these dashboards, feel free to shoot us an email. You can shoot me an email directly. I'll put my email in the chat in a minute here. And I'm happy to work with you all to develop new dashboards or add things that are missing from existing dashboards or answer any usage questions. So I'm going to move ahead to the next item, which is a review of bugs in 3.5 and a review of the timeline. This is my favorite topic. So as we mentioned on the last call, we're keeping a log of all reported bugs in our JIRA project. And I'm just going to really quickly step through those bugs. What I'm looking at here is an internal version of our Kanban board. But I'll show you the version of our Kanban board that we have available to outside stakeholders at the end of this. I'm just going to step through the bugs here since it's a little faster. So we've had a few new ones reported in the last 2 weeks. I'm going to really quickly review our old ones, and then I'll spend a little bit more time on our new ones. So starting off, we have a typo in the data dictionary for the UUID. So in the data dictionary, in the front pages where the attributes are described, the UUID was described incorrectly, and the dashes in between the
okay, I just saved it for you, so you might need to, I don't know if you have to go back in.
The dashes in between the sections of the UUID were missing, and for some reason, JIRA is interpreting this as a strike through, but there's a dash after the A in there. I think if I click edit, it'll show the actual dashes. So as you can see, this is probably just a formatting issue that's going to be corrected in a later version. There you go. So there's a dash right there that was absent in the version in the data dictionary. The version of UUID that's contained in the XSD is correct. So use the XSD as your authoritative source of the UUID formatting. Okay, so this one's correlation IDs. The correlation IDs on eOutcome 09 and 10 are incorrect. The correlation ID should be on the parent group for those elements. This is just a case of the recurrence of those elements changed and the correlation IDs did not get moved as they should have. There's a discrepancy in the ancillary documents where some of the performance measures listed for elements are not showing up correctly. So in this case, I would use, again, the XSD as your authoritative source of this information. If the performance measure is listed in the documentation in the XSD, then it should be there. Also, the data dictionary does have this information correct, and we're looking into why the ancillary documents are missing this information. The changelog document is missing eOutcome 17. It was removed from the standard. Again, the XSDs in this case are correct. And we're going to work to change the change log to include the outcome 17 as removed element. More missing correlation IDs. The new elements, e-disposition 31, as well as e-disposition 15 and 23, do not have correlation IDs. These are going to be added in the next build. Comment in e-disposition 29. The data comment lists the description for a referral agency, but none of the value choices are for a referral agency. We're going to review this data element comment and correct it in the next version. Spelling error. In e-disposition 30, the word dispositions is spelled wrong. This will be corrected in the next build of the standard. The minimum length on custom configuration. So all of the versions of custom configuration, E custom configuration, D custom configuration, SE custom configuration, SD custom configuration, have a minimum length of 0, and this is going to be changed to a minimum length of 2 to be consistent with custom configurations 01. E other has a crew member group that used to contain a national element, therefore it was at a minimum occurrence of 1. Since E other 05 was demoted in 3.5, this needs to be changed to a minimum occurrence of 0. This is going to be corrected in the next build of the standard. And then last is a change to the correlation ID type. This is the data type that would affect all correlation ID attributes as well as the custom configuration 09, custom results 02, and custom results 03 elements. It has a minimum length of 0. We're going to change this, I believe, to a minimum length of 2. So that is a list of all the bugs. I'm real quickly going to show you where you can find this later as you're moving through the standard. And notice oddities. You want to check if they're reported. So from the NEMSIS website, the fastest way to arrive at these bugs is to go through the release timeline link in the middle of the page. Then go to 3.5 revision in the breadcrumbs. How can I follow along? And then NEMSIS public JIRA project, which will open in a new window. It might be useful to bookmark this link, but this will take you to a Confluence page, which is totally public, and in the selected for development section is where we're keeping all these bugs. They're a little more compact over here, but when you click on them, it should take you out to JIRA, and it should open up full screen so you can see the full details and any comments or solutions that have been proposed by the TAC. As these bugs are corrected, they'll move through into the resolve column, and a new build of the standard will be released on end of November, maybe December 1st. If you notice any bugs as you're working with the new XSDs or other resources, please don't hesitate to send us an email. You can email any of us at the TAC, and we'll get it logged into JIRA so that we can find a solution and follow up on it. Does anyone have any questions about bugs or bug reports?
Some of those seem like they might have to put testing on hold, like some of the ones that are min like 0. Is that the case, or? We
still intend to release the compliance testing materials at the same time as well, end of November.
Okay.
So I didn't mean for that to be confusing. The new build of the standard will occur at the same time as compliance testing materials are released, which we're kind of looking at basically the end of November for both of those items right now.
Okay, so we would implement assuming that those things are going to be fixed?
Yeah, from a technical standpoint, my recommendation might be for some of those issues would be to just, for example, if it's something simple like minimum occurs, I would download the XSD, open it up, and just change it and use that one to validate documents. we're trying to avoid making a lot of incremental changes and having everyone ending up with a different version, and sort of batching everything up into one section. If we do encounter any large or like significant bugs, those will be patched immediately. For example, I had a report yesterday of some issues with sample data not passing schematron, failing for errors because of missing not values. That was patched immediately. So if you're using the sample data that you downloaded more than a week ago, I would suggest you go out to the site and grab new sample data, because some of the files previously did not pass the schematron validation.
Right. And one of the issues, though, was the correlation ID is on the wrong element. That's a high impact, I would think. So that's going to make the sample tests not pass XSD, I would guess.
That's true. So would you think that that's a large enough issue so that we should release a patch immediately?
Yeah,
Because we could.
Yeah, like you said, I think XSD as a source of truth makes sense. And so any mistake in there is a critical issue, is my thinking.
Okay. I'll take that back to the team and see if we can release a patch sooner rather than later that deals with some of those XSD issues. Perhaps we could correct the XSD without regenerating the data dictionary and all the other resources. Because I'll be honest, most of the difficulty to releasing a patch is the associated resources. It's very easy for us to generate XSD updates.
Okay. And if it was like a preview release, something like that, so it's not a formal release, maybe that would help your process a little. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I was kind of hoping that we would identify a lot of these bugs in the candidate release, but unfortunately, we've sort of moved past there and we're still getting reports. I'll take it back to the team and we'll get an update out on what our plan is. There'll be an email out on the Google group, probably by the end of the week. Are there any other comments? If anyone has any comments or further bug reports, any suggestions to make this a little easier on those who are developing 3.5 products, please don't hesitate to shoot any of us an email, and we'll do our best to accommodate that. And definitely, if you notice any bugs or any issues in the XSD, please let us know ASAP so that we can add them to our list and hopefully get it all cleaned up. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Julianne.
Yeah, this is Clay. I just wanted to also reiterate what Laurel has said. There's been really some great folks that have reached out anytime they found any inconsistency as they've been developing. That's been so helpful. Some of them have just been misunderstandings. Others have been true bugs. But anything you come across you think may be problematic, that's incredibly helpful for us to know about. So thank you for all your efforts in that regard. We are getting a little bit of feedback. I'm not sure, Martin. It may be your phone there in Oklahoma. Perhaps if you could put your phone on mute, that might be helpful. But yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Laurel had said about that, because that was incredibly helpful to us. Thanks.
If there aren't any other further questions, Josh, do you want to take the screen and start on your section?
Yes, just a second here. Okay, did that come up for you?
Looks good.
Okay, great. So as you all know, over the past few weeks, we've been taking some time on these calls to recap discussions and decisions from the NEMSIS annual meeting that was held in Utah in August. We're going to take a few minutes today to recap a few things about State DataSet. This will be pretty quick. I think State DataSet has been well covered so far in the NEMSIS 3.5 release. Just a couple things that'll kind of tie up some loose ends from the annual meeting. First thing was at the annual meeting, there was the request or recommendation that we add support for an effective date to state dataset documents. And so that was done right at the very end of the 3.5 changes before it went out to final public release September 30th, October 1st. So the effective date is going to reside in the root element of or the document element of the state dataset. It already has an attribute called timestamp, and that should be the date and time at which the document itself was generated. The new attribute, excuse me, the new attribute is the effective date, which allows a state data manager to indicate when the information in this build of the state data set should take effect. So developers of receive and process state level systems, you, as you know, will be required to support the generation of state data set documents from within your system, and you will submit them to the NEMSIS TAC, to the national database through the standard web services submission process. You'll need to provide a way for your state data managers to, of course, collect and compile that data that's going to go into the state data set. The vast majority of it, or really all of it, comes from configuration in the state system. You know, the medication and procedure list, the protocols that are allowed, the agency list, the facility list, et cetera. But you'll need to provide a way for your state data manager, of course, to say, I want to go ahead and send an update of my state data set to the national database. So some way for them to trigger that update to go out. I would highly recommend that you provide a way for them to preview the content that's going to be submitted so that they can make sure everything's correct. And then you'll also need to provide a way for them to fill in this effective date. And so they may put out an update in March that takes effect on July 1st, whatever it might be. It may be an effective date that's today. We're going to encourage states to put things out in advance of their effective dates, but it is possible they could need to put out something that needs to be taking effect immediately. So that's been added to the XSD, and something that state vendors will need to support as they generate these files. All right, second has to do with how we're going to collect data systems in compliance testing. This was discussed at the annual meeting, various ideas about you know, how do we ensure that collect data systems are starting to really utilize the data from state data sets in an automated fashion that saves time for their customers. And in those discussions, there wasn't a lot of consensus about exactly how that should look. So the approach that will be taken in compliance testing with 3.5 this year is a fairly light touch, but is a start, I think, in signaling how state data set data should be used by collect data systems. And so it might look something like this. I've included here a little kind of snapshot from when a collect data system goes through compliance testing, they receive a bunch of HTML documents, basically, you know, demographic report or patient care report documents that are in this sort of a layout. They tell them all the different data elements and then the values that should be entered for those elements. And then what they do is they go into their software and they fill out a demographic report, they fill out a patient care report. Then when they export that data and submit it to the testing system compares their XML output to the expected XML output, kind of the gold standard, if you would. So typically the HTML document would contain all the data that they need to put in to their system. We're going to change it a little bit, and this is an example of how that might come out. This, for example, is a facility that needs to be in the demographic report. And in this case, the facility location code is 1064, but the other data elements related to that facility have been sort of quote unquote masked out, and direct the collect data system to obtain that data from the state data set that has been provided as part of the testing package. So the collect data system could find facility number 1064 in the state data set, and from finding it there, then it should know what the name, address, city, state, zip code, and county, et cetera, would be for that facility. So, you know, this is still the kind of thing where, yeah, the state data, the collect data system vendor could just open up the state data set and read it, and then they could manually set up the facility you know, by copying the information by hand into their system. They would still pass compliance testing if they use that approach. Or they can automate the processing of state data sets, in which case they would be able to just load it into their system. And as they set up the agency, they simply pick that facility from a list that has been loaded into the product and have the product automatically pull in all of that data. And that is, of course, the preferred approach. But that's what we're looking at for the compliance testing aspect with State DataSet.
Would this be a totally custom state data set for the compliance testing, or could you possibly you know, take one of the existing state data sets and use it that way, just so we can use the existing codes and whatnot without having a special build for compliance? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. This is a custom state data set because we need to be able to test all aspects of state data set. So states, for example, you know, if you look at any one state, they utilize you know, anywhere from just a little bit to most of the features in state data set, but no guarantee that they utilize all of them. For example, a state may not have any custom demographic data elements, or they may not require protocols. So we do have a custom built state data set for a hypothetical state. It uses a state code that represents a real state, so everything's valid. But that's so that we can, you know, we can basically handcraft what's in that state data set so that we can test various aspects of support for it in compliance testing.
Okay, so you don't mind if for example, a vendor uses the state data sets that are available publicly, and they might need to have a custom build to accommodate this custom state data set. Is that okay for compliance testing?
Yeah, so let's say you have a system that's, you know, it's a hosted system. You have one install that serves the whole country. And in that install, obviously, you're going to be pulling in live state data sets from real states. And let's say we were using the state of Montana as the state that was used for the test cases. Well, then you're going to get a test state data set for the state of Montana that's going to contain not necessarily what's in the real Montana state data set, right? And so, yeah, you would probably need to be deploying that in a separate instance of your product for compliance testing purposes.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the questions on that. Okay, lastly, just some things in training or educational or technical assistance that came up from the annual meeting. The NEMSIS TAC plans to develop some sort of a demonstration on how collect data systems can automate their utilization of state data set. Realized I missed a word there. So this may take the form of a webinar or a video demonstration, or maybe even a kind of a proof of concept product to show how collect data systems can utilize the information in a state data set to automate some things for their customers, to make things easier for their customers to be consistent with state resources and requirements, kind of ease the data entry burden on their customers. And then lastly, we're looking at ways to improve that communication path from states to vendors and agencies when state data sets are updated. Today, some improvements have been made. So for example, there's the weekly email that comes out that lists all state repository changes, including if a state made changes to its state data set. So we want to continue to look at that communication path and perhaps provide some additional resources to facilitate that communication. Okay, let's see, there were a few things in the chat. Make sure we catch up on that. Okay, great. So that was all related to other topics. All right, so that's just the wrap up, loop closure on state data set. Any additional questions or comments on these topics that I covered? Okay, Julianne, back to you. I'll turn off my sharing here.
Sounds good. Any other questions for Josh while we have him on the line? Okay. Are there any items from Office of EMS NHTSA?
I have none, Julianne.
Okay. Sounds good. So we'll move into open forum. Are there any questions, concerns, any issues that anyone in the audience has that you want to bring up at this time?
Yeah, this is Clay. Maybe I'll just mention just real briefly, recently, in fact, this week, I think NEMSIS, the new revitalized EMS Compass project has revised some performance measures that EMS Compass began work on and either finished or came very close to finishing. They are releasing a new set of those Compass performance measures. So I just want to let vendors know that has happened, as well as the states. We're going to review those. Of course, we have a dashboard that allows agencies to benchmark themselves on EMS Compass measures related to like agencies across the country. We'll be making revisions to that as were made by NEMSIS and adding other ones that NEMSIS is adding. So we'll add that for an item for the next call, just so we can kind of all be kind of on the same page with the rollout of those new parameters for performance measures.
Thank you, Clay. Is there anything else? Our next meeting is November 13th, same time, same place. We will get you the schedule for the rest of November and December. We'll be making some adjustments on those scheduled dates for the V3 call due to the holiday season. If there is no other comments or questions, we'll go ahead and let you go for the day. We appreciate your time this morning and your participation in the phone call. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.